Hello and welcome. I'm going to wait a little bit to give people time to jump on. Hi, for those jumping on. I'm just giving you a minute to join me on this Saturday night here where I am in Sydney, Australia, anyways. Might be a different time in your part of the world. So, bringing motherhood studies into motherhood support. What does that mean? Let's dig into it. Let's talk about what motherhood studies is. Let's talk about the space of what motherhood support is. Let's talk about why mothers. And I want to share with you some insights, some foundational insights into maternal theory and also matricentric feminism as an approach, and to give you a kind of bit of a taste and a bit of an insight into my work on a deeper level. So, welcome to those of you who are new to my work, who may be joining me here for the first time. Thank you for being here. Thank you also to those who are taking time to watch the replay of this. I first just want to acknowledge really quickly and recognize your commitment of time and engaging in a resource like this. I know that we are all really stretched for time, and that most people that I work with are mothers themselves who work in the motherhood support space. And so it's this real juggling act of trying to negotiate competing demands that we have in our lives, and taking time out to listen to this while you may even be multitasking with other things is really significant. So I want to thank you for being here first. My name is Dr. Sophie Brock. I'm a Motherhood Studies sociologist. I'll explain to you what that means. I am also a single mum to my 3-year-old daughter, almost 4, I can't believe it. And I am based in Sydney, Australia. I run a podcast called The Good Enough Mother. Definitely check that out if you do enjoy this talk, because there's more resources through my podcast. I run the Motherhood Studies Practitioner certification, which is linked in connection with this talk. I also have a Liberated Motherhood membership, which is basically an online community for mums to come together, and I offer online courses and mentoring. So that is a little bit about me in this space. The reason why I'm so passionate about motherhood is not actually because I'm a mother myself, although of course that's a factor. I actually came into being interested about motherhood and mothering quite early on in my life. Sort of when I finished high school, I was interested and drawn towards projects that focused on an investigation of women's lives as mothers. I did some major projects on the work of Sylvia Plath and other significant mothers in history, and was really curious about their experience. And that fed into, in my bachelor's degree, my Bachelor of Arts, University of Sydney. And I was taking this course on, it's actually on symbolic violence, and it was a sociology course. And when I signed up to do my degree, I thought I'd definitely major in history or philosophy. And I was filling out my application form, and I had to put an extra subject in on my enrollment form. And I thought, oh, I don't even know what to pick. And I just flicked through the handbook and I said, oh, sociology, that sounds fine. I'll do that, and then I'll just drop it after the first semester. And lo and behold, I actually fell in love with the subject. I went on to do an honours year in it and then my PhD, and this has become my career and my focus and passion. And I came across the work and the name of Motherhood Studies as part of a unit of study that I was looking at. It was actually on symbolic violence, was the unit of study. And I came across this term motherhood studies, and it was coined by Professor Andrea O'Reilly, whose work I'm going to share with you a little bit in this talk. And when I came across this work, it was almost as if a whole new world opened up to me, because I was like, wow, here is a whole area of study, here is a whole discipline, a whole school of thought that is actually interested in the experiences of women who are mothers because of their existence in and of themselves. A lot of the time when we look at research that is on mothers and motherhood, we're interested in, I say we, as in the kind of institution and the body of research is interested in the way that mothers impact others. So we're interested in exploring the experience of mothers because of the impact they have on their children. And something that I got really curious about was going, well, actually, yeah, that's important, but also mothers are important in and of themselves. Women go through this huge life transition when they become mothers, and that doesn't just erase their identity. That doesn't just erase who they are. And I got really curious about that connection. And so I explored this topic in relation to mothers of children with disabilities, additional needs, neurodiversity. And I was really curious on those mothers' experiences of motherhood more broadly. So what does motherhood mean to them? What does being a mother mean to them? Their experiences of identity. So who are they? Questions about our sense of self and who we are as human beings, and also their sense of relationships, their social relationships, their partnerships, their relationships with their children. And so what a predominant kind of conceptual finding that came out of my PhD research was thinking about motherhood as a system. And this is part of what I want to explain to you here in this video, and it's something that's really key that I hope is a message that you take away from watching this, is that when a woman becomes a mother, she does not just go through the often but not always physiological process and changes to her body. She goes through not only likely relational changes, so changes in how she relates to others, her primary relationship, if she is in a partnership, her relationships with her own parents, her friends, colleagues, if she's in paid work, her community. She not only goes through all of those changes emotionally, psychologically, she's going through all of these transitions while also learning how to mother a new human being. She also goes through the transition of entering into a social realm, entering into a social role. And when we enter into the social role of mother, we enter into a particular set of social rules about what it means to be a mother in our society. And now some of these rules are unspoken, some of them are spoken. And the thing about these rules of motherhood is that we don't just learn them when we become a mum. We're socialized into understanding these rules from when we are children ourselves. And I'm going to explain to you and offer you a little analogy that might help in dissecting and kind of talking about how this process operates. Because what I'm talking about here is socialization. It's the way that the individual is situated within their social context, society, culture. And so I first just want to say that when we're thinking about this transition from the mother into motherhood, it's therefore not just an individual transition. It's not just a transition that mother goes through in and of herself. Yes, it's highly and intensely personal and specific to the individual, but it's actually connected to a broader cultural pattern. Motherhood has a history. Motherhood has an ideology. Motherhood shifts and changes according to the context that you're born within, the level of support and resources that surrounds you, and other factors which you have little to no control over. And I'm going to list through some of these a little bit later in this talk. And so why do we focus on mothers? Why a focus on motherhood? I'm really curious actually as to when I get asked this question, what assumptions may be behind it. So to demonstrate this, when I first went into studying motherhood, I was not a mum. I actually gave birth to my daughter a week after I was awarded my PhD. I graduated when she was 3 months old. And what was curious is that as a researcher interested in the experience of motherhood, there was a lot of curiosity and even perhaps suspicion, maybe even some judgment around why I was interested in motherhood. Was it because I really wanted to be a mother? Was it because I idolized mothers? Did I have some sort of complex about motherhood? What was it? And the reason why this question in and of itself is revealing of assumptions about motherhood is because it suggests that motherhood isn't a topic of value, of interest, and a topic worthy of scholarly inquiry in and of itself. It suggests that actually a researcher or somebody outside who is interested in and curious about motherhood, she must have some other motive around it. It can't be led purely by curiosity. And that speaks to the ways that motherhood is seen as a natural, taken for granted, just part of how our life is. It's just mothers, why are you interested in mothers? And we don't get asked these same questions when we have different areas of focus and interest in academic work and life, but I won't go into that, separate topic. But when we think about motherhood, it has a huge relevance for all parts of our society, right? And it feels pretty obvious to have to say this. We all were mothered in some way. We have a relationship to either our actual mother or imagined mother or maternal figure. Majority of women do become mothers. Women who, and those who are not mothers, often are engaged in caregiving roles of others that may involve mothering relationships and mothering work. Beyond that, we know mothers. We likely love mothers. And motherhood has relevance to the areas of obviously antenatal support, pregnancy, birth, maternal child health care, early childhood education and care, has relevance to policy implications, our economy. Think about parental leave, think about flexible working policies, anti-discrimination policies, family law, welfare, our taxation system. I could go on, right? It actually, motherhood is relevant to, I think, almost every part of our society and structure and world within which we live. And there's a quote here that I want to share with you from Professor Andrea O'Reilly that I think is really important and key. She says that the category of mother is distinct from the category of woman. Many of the problems that mothers face, the social, economic, political, cultural, psychological, and so forth, are specific to women's role and identity as mothers. Indeed, mothers are oppressed under patriarchy as women and as mothers. And in the Motherhood Studies certification, I do a whole module on this and draw on the work of another scholar, Dr. Petra Buskins, who says that her theory in a nutshell is that women have been freed while mothers have been oppressed. It's a complex relationship, but we get into that further in the course. So mothers continue to experience distinctively gender discrimination. We have specific pressures within the healthcare system, within the workplace, within society more broadly. This is from work from Pascoe, Lee, and Buskins, 2019. And so when we're thinking about the role of a woman who becomes a mother, there are certain ways that her experience and her world is shaped because of her role and position as a mother, and that's important to acknowledge. And this is part of actually how motherhood studies came about as a discipline. And it's interesting because actually a lot of the work, which is decades and decades old, and I mean, we've been writing about motherhood for as long as we've been mothers, but a lot of the work sort of preceded the labeling of the term motherhood studies. And so it came about as a field in around 2008, and Professor Andrea O'Reilly coined the term motherhood studies. I just want to acknowledge her here. Because she's an author of over 20 books on motherhood. She has over 80 journal articles, 100 conference papers. It's just, her work is unbelievable and prolific, and she's agreed to come in and do a Zoom Q&A session as part of the certification course, which is really exciting. But the thing that Professor O'Reilly has noted, and the other maternal scholars have noted as well, is the ways in which there has not been made adequate room and space in academia, and potentially outside as well, but that's probably another conversation, for a focus on mothers, a mother-centered focus and an approach. And so motherhood studies is almost providing a home for research and literature. It's providing a base and a foundation for people who are interested and invested and who are performing research, writing, and work on motherhood. It's a place for us to come together, and I'm president of a nonprofit organisation called Maternal Scholars Australia, and we are a network of people who are working in this space, researchers, activists, educators, and so forth. And so the question kind of raises here, well, why aren't we taught motherhood studies? If we're working in a profession or in a realm, or we take training that is giving us a particular skill set in order to care for mothers, why is there not explicit mention of a whole field of study that is dedicated to investigating and supporting mothers? Why is that? There's not an easy answer here, but I'll share with you a couple of different theories. And so there's a scholar called Kawash, and she kind of wrote a paper on this and said Motherhood studies today is where feminist studies was in the 1970s. We're uniquely posed to have a transformative effect in a broader social context, but we're also under siege and at risk of diminishing into divided encampments. In other words, we've got the opportunity to come together, but we're also at risk of becoming dispersed. And when we become so dispersed, we lose our potential for collective power and therefore change. She says that she believes there is a disappearance of motherhood from research, journals, and academic books. So, quote, as the director of one of 7 PhD programs in women's and gender studies in the mid-2000s, I do not recall receiving a single graduate application that proposed a study of mothering or motherhood. Where it did appear during this period, motherhood was most frequently subsumed into discussions of women and work, migration, or reproduction. And so when we do see motherhood show up as a focus, it's really interesting to think about the context that it's showing up in. And this is partly why sometimes when we talk about mothers in the way that I'm talking about motherhood studies with you in this talk, it can almost be seen as suspicious. And I think that it's important to acknowledge here that sometimes it can be because advocating for the valuing of mothering can seem to be aligned with conservative narratives around family values. It can sometimes be framed as an area of study or an interest that may potentially be at odds with feminist aims. And again, I have a whole module in the certification that talks about this more specifically in terms of matricentric feminism. But that's just something I want to introduce you to really briefly, to say that we need a mother-centered feminism, a mother-centered approach to looking at, uncovering, understanding, getting curious about, talking about issues that impact women who are mothers specifically because of their experience and identity and social role as mothers. Now, there are 3 distinctions here that I want to talk about and make clear. And this is where I'm going to be drawing on an analogy. So the 3 distinctions when thinking about motherhood and motherhood studies is motherhood as an institution, as a structure. So motherhood, the structure. Then we have mothering, the practice. Think about mothering as a verb. It's something that we do. Then we have the mother. That's identity. Subjectivity. That's how I talk about it. So these 3 distinctions are really important because it actually allows us a language to talk about the nuance, the complexities, and the various ways that we as mothers experience motherhood. Because we can be living within a disempowered and disempowering system of motherhood as a structure, as the social rules, as the social norms, as the social shoulds. We can be living within that structure while mothering in a way that feels empowered and rewarding. It's hard, and I think we need community to do that. But that's a conversation we can have. And separate to that again is the role of mother as identity, a sense of subjectivity, a sense of recognizing that actually mother and woman are not synonymous categories. They're not interchangeable. And by having this distinction and recognition that mother is a separate identity, we are also able to recognize all of the ways that motherhood, the structure, impacts women who are not mothers as well. And we know this, right? We see the assumptions that are made of women who have chosen not to or are not able to have children. We see the ways that motherhood can often be put on a pedestal as being the way that you reach full adulthood, and that we have a deficit or something wrong with us if we are not able to or do not desire to be a mother. So when we're talking about motherhood as an institution, as a structure, it has relevance well beyond the mother herself. Okay, it's a really, really big conversation, and this is why I think this work needs to get taken much more broadly than it currently is. Motherhood as a structure, as an institution, was originally identified by Adrienne Rich in her book Old Woman Born. This was in 1976. And Rich says, quote, "We do not think of the power stolen from us and the power withheld from us in the name of the institution of motherhood." She says the idea of maternal power has been domesticated. In transfiguring and enslaving woman, the womb, the ultimate source of power, has historically been turned against us and itself made into a source of powerlessness. And so this identification on this link between the body, between the individual, with the broader structure and institution is one that's really important. Patricia Hill Collins, another feminist scholar, says, quote, "Every culture has a worldview that it uses in order to evaluate its own experiences." So let me break down what that means through drawing on this analogy. And it's of the fish tank. Some of you who are podcast listeners or in my courses will have heard me speak about this before. And it is a really simplistic way, but I think effective way of talking about how motherhood operates as a structure and socially, and how power operates as well. So I want you to visualize with me a fish tank, right? A round glass fish tank and with fish inside, filled up with water and a few trees and bridges inside, right? And so we think about this fish tank, this structure, as representing motherhood, the institution, the structure. It's the society within which we live. And yeah, we're the fish inside. So as the fish, as the individuals, as the mothers within this broader structure, we are swimming around in this world and we're looking around at the outside of our world, things external to us that we've brought in here, and we see it as natural. We see it as normal. It's taken for granted that this is just the way it is. This is what it means to be a mother. We signed up for this. We chose this. We're supposed to be naturally good at this. We're supposed to have maternal instinct kick in. And we're looking around at the outside of this tank, kind of symbolically. We can be looking at other mothers. And if we are struggling in our role as mother in any way, if we feel like it doesn't come naturally, if we feel like we're an outsider in any way, if we feel like we're resenting motherhood or mothering, if we're missing our life pre-motherhood, if we're losing our patience with our children, if we're feeling disconnected, if we're feeling angry, if we're feeling dissatisfied or discontent, and a whole array of other things, then we're seen as being the problem in and of ourselves. Because we individualize what are often symptoms of structural problems when we can't see the structure, when we take the structure for granted as normal and as the best way of being. And so the first step in being able to, both as mothers ourselves and as people who are supporting mothers, the first step in being able to start to talk about an empowered experience of mothering, the first step in starting to talk about changing the ways that mothers are valued, supported, respected, given choice, agency. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about children, of course, and we're talking about community, of course. Okay, it always goes beyond the mother. But if we're going to start talking about these things, and if these are goals and aims, and we're identifying problems that we are facing, that our clients are facing, that those around us are facing, we need to be able to identify and talk about the structure within which we live. Because if we do not change the structure, we cannot ultimately make long-lasting, significant change for all of the individuals who live within that structure. And this model, by the way, can be picked up and replicated for a bunch of other big kind of social and institutionalized themes, problems, institutionalized racism as an example of that. And so if we're thinking about the individual fish within this fish tank, I came up with this analogy when giving a talk in my membership. And I love the women in there. They started coming up with all of these ways that we can extend this analogy in saying we need to start ramming that tank, okay? We need to start thinking about ourselves as whales within the tank. Because as individual mothers, as the fish within the tank, if we start hitting it, ramming it, forming little cracks, we can create little changes. And I would like to be able to say we just jump out of the tank. I'd like to be able to say we don't like this version of motherhood. We don't like this version of the way things are. Let's just opt out. Let's opt out. Let's jump into a different tank. It's not possible to do unless we move locations into an entirely different society and culture. This tank is framed and shaped and created in a particular historical and social context. Go back 50 years, 100 years, the tank looks different. And this can sometimes be why there can be a disconnect or a sense of not feeling heard when talking sometimes to mothers who were doing the bulk of their mothering in a different generation, because it's more than likely that they were mothering in a different fish tank. They were mothering within a context that had a different level of resources available to them, that had different expectations around what it means to be a good mother. And so what does that mean? What does that mean to be a good mother in our current version of the tank? And if we're all sitting together in a lecture hall, then I would ask you to share with me some things that may come to mind when you think about the perfect mum, the good mum. Who is she? What does she look like? And sometimes at first it can feel a bit like we draw a blank. I'm like, I don't know. Why is this significant? You want me to write it down, or I might come up with a couple of things? And clients who I work with one-on-one with, this is one of the first things we do. And some women say to me, I filled up half a notebook with stuff. Because once we start unveiling and once we start actually exploring the things that we have internalized and recognize as being markers of what a good mother means, it's an unraveling. And so here are some features of that list. And this is not all-encompassing. It doesn't include everything. The perfect mother, she is endlessly patient. She doesn't yell at her children. She doesn't express anger. She doesn't resent her children. She's in a relationship. She's in likely a monogamous relationship, a heterosexual relationship, married. Depends on the number of children she has. She has more than one child because that would be selfish, but she doesn't have too many children because that would be selfish. Okay, she's in particular age range, right? So she's not too young because that would be irresponsible. She's not too old because that would be irresponsible. She's likely represented as white, as middle class, as able-bodied, not having a disability or additional needs. Her children are able-bodied, they don't have a disability or additional needs. Her child fits within the conception of the good child. I did a podcast on this last week if you want to check this out further. But her child is not disrespectful, is not disobedient. Her child follows the rules. Her child presents well because we know that our children are a reflection of ourselves. The good mother, she's also a good wife. She's a good daughter. She's a good friend. She's a good member of the community. She's giving. She's selfless. She's self-sacrificing. And the kicker here as well, she's economically self-sufficient. She doesn't rely on a partner or the state to financially support her, but she always puts her children first. She's both the good employee or the good business owner and the good mother. So she's both driven, focused, and can play the game of the individualistic, kind of consumerist, capitalist gain and gains of success. But she also is selfless and self-sacrificing. Yeah, unrealistic views, Mariam. It's totally unrealistic because when we start pulling apart all of the expectations of what being a perfect mum or a good mum encompasses in our society, and we will have internalized and embedded these to various degrees ourselves. But once we start actually breaking this down, we start to realize how pervasive this is. And we can probably start to identify within our own experience where we are falling outside of this conception, where we're being the bad mum. And this is part of the reason why guilt is so pervasive in motherhood. Because we fall off that pedestal that we've been put on. We're the fish inside that tank and we're looking up and we're like, we're not measuring up. We're not good enough. So we feel guilt. I must not be enough. There must be something wrong with me. I need to do better. I need to try harder. I need to do more. I need to bring in more support. I need to self-care better. The individual takes a huge weight of this. And part of the perfect mother conception as well is that the mental and emotional load is on you. Your children are expected to be your responsibility 24/7. If you need a break, that is seen as almost an emergency measure. Some sort of individual failing if we aren't able to mother 24/7 or if we desire not to. And so I could talk on and on about this, but I'll move on to the next section here. But it's to say that there is a certain standard and a certain set of rules. And when we inevitably fall outside of that, we try and guilt ourselves into becoming better. We fall off the pedestal again, and the cycle goes over and over. And part of this cycle, I call it the anger guilt trap, is that when we fall off the pedestal, we also carry a sense of resentment that can sometimes simmer because we recognize in some way that these ideals are unachievable. And it can exacerbate our sense of isolation and perhaps low self-worth if we compare ourselves to other mothers who we perceive to be meeting the benchmarks and standards of the perfect mother myth. And I would say to that whatever we perceive in another as apparently and supposedly meeting all of these standards is often an illusion. We're not seeing all sides. That is not to say that mothering has to be inevitably a challenge and a struggle and something that we feel disempowered by. It is not the same as saying that. And I go into this in more depth in certification. So why challenge the tank? If we've got this fish tank here, with the fish inside it, okay, Sophie, you've told us about the perfect mother myth, the way that we've embedded and internalized potentially some of these standards. We know that if we fall short in some areas, we may try and earn our way back to good motherhood in other areas. For example, I'm a single mum. Okay, I fall outside that conception of the perfect family, the idealized perfect mother as part of that. Well, I'm going to be really self-sacrificing. My kids are never going to go without. I'm going to stretch myself to the limits of my capacity to ensure that my children don't miss out in some way. Okay, we can bargain with ourselves around this. But this comes at a cost. Research has consistently shown the detrimental effects of internalizing the perfect mother myth. It's also called intensive mothering ideology, the new mummism, the good mother concept. There's a bunch of ways to describe this concept. Those who face these pressures, who have internalized these standards, and who just live within the tank, i.e., all mothers, experience a sense of stress, a sense of anxiety, guilt, shame, higher rates of depression. So the more that we internalize the perfect mother myth, the more that we are trying to live up to intensive mothering expectations, the higher our rates are, unsurprisingly, of anxiety, depression, guilt. And when we start to challenge the internalization, we can also start to challenge some of the effects of that. But it's complex, right? And it was in my own research, my PhD research, found that it was when my participants most judged themselves according to perfect mother ideals that they felt most guilty. And so when we are talking about challenging mum guilt, it is ineffective to say, just no need to be guilty. Don't worry about it. Be easy on yourself. Because again, we're placing responsibility back on the individual without knowledge and understanding of how the context we live in within shapes and influences the way that we feel about ourselves and our motherhood. And this is why it isn't all about choice. My role as a sociologist, a social scientist, so that means we look at society as a system, we identify patterns, relationships, and how the individual relates to that broader structure. And the reason why it's important to say it's not about choice, a couple of consequences to that, but the reason why it's important to say that is because if we assume that it is all about choice, it can also mean when mothers struggle with aspects of their motherhood, we can ask them to take accountability individually without recognizing the broader ways that systems are impacting her. O'Reilly says, quote, given that no one can achieve intensive mothering, all mothers can see themselves as failures, according to this standard. Quote, this is how the discourse works psychologically to regulate, i.e. paralyze mothers via guilt and shame. And so if we go back to this fish tank model, as the fish within there, if we're struggling in some way, we may look around at other fish and see them living up to these standards and ideals, supposedly. We can put the blame back on ourselves. And that's part of the reason why connection and a sense of belonging in motherhood is so important, and why I think being able to share our experiences in their complexity and in our authenticity is so vital and key, because not only does it help release us from the chains of intensive mothering ideology, but it paves a path and paves a way for allowing and facilitating and creating space for other mothers to join us in being able to do this as well. Because this is not work that I don't think it's work we can do in isolation. I don't think it's work that we can do alone. And this is part of the reason why I created my business and the courses that I run. And so what can we do then? How can we emphasize our agency within this system? How can we think about the ways that we can ourselves and support the mothers that we work with to be able to experience an empowered, fulfilling, liberated experience of motherhood within this system? Because changing the actual system, we probably won't see it in our lifetime, right? A complete overhaul and a change. Maybe, we'll see. But we need to do work now to support the mothers who are becoming mothers next year and the year after that, for the women who gave birth this morning. As individuals, as members of our community, as mothers, as people who work in support roles in the arena of motherhood, if you work with mothers, then we individually can make enormous difference through our work, because every single mother counts. And the level of support, space holding, and processing that we can support individual mothers in doing, not only, of course, impacts that individual mother, it impacts her children, her children's children. It impacts all of the relationships around her, and it ultimately impacts the family and broader community. And so we can think about mothering, the practice, as distinct from motherhood, the institution. We can think about mothering, the practice, as being an activity, as being a verb, as being a certain type of discipline. And this is drawn on the work of Professor Sarah Ruddick and her concept of maternal thinking. Again, I go into this in greater depth in the certification, but maternal thinking is referring to the thinking work, unsurprisingly, that comes out of the experience of mothering. When we become mothers, we develop a certain skill set, a specific way of thinking, a particular practice that allows us to care for, nurture, nourish, and raise children. This is an intellectual activity as much as it is a practical role. That is important to acknowledge, because too often mothering is not seen as work because it's generally not financially rewarded, And in our society and culture and context, we generally only value work and see as real work the work that has financial and economic benefits. Mothering and unpaid care work, by the way, does have financial and economic benefits. Again, another conversation. And so, how can we support then an empowered practice of mothering to acknowledge maternal thinking and the act and the practice that mothers are engaging in? How can we support an empowered and rewarding version of that within this system while also trying to push back against the system? That's how we do it. This is why I created my certification, because I saw a real gap here in supporting and offering this information, these perspectives, this way of thinking to people who work with mothers as well as mothers themselves. And I want to share with you here a quote. This is again from O'Reilly, and I think that it's really telling, and it was a huge motivation for me in going into this realm of work and taking it more broadly and more widely than within the kind of academic realm. Quote, patriarchy resists empowered mothering precisely because it understands its real power to bring about a true and enduring cultural revolution. Indeed, it will be mothers, empowered and united, who will create the just and caring society that we seek for ourselves and for our children. Mothering is incredibly important work, and mothers are women as mothers. Their value is not just in their performance. Their value is not just in what they do for others. Their worth is not just in how they care for people outside of themselves. And underlying all of the work that I do with practitioners and with mothers is coming back to an acknowledgement of our inherent worthiness and enoughness as individual people, separate to our role as mothers. Because I believe that if we link our worthiness and our motherhood, then we're setting ourselves up to experience constant sense of not being enough, of failure, and of guilt. It's part of why I called my podcast The Good Enough Mother. It's a theory from Donald Winnicott, if you want to look into that further. So this is part of why I created this certification, right? I want this scholarship. I want these conversations to be happening outside of spaces of just researchers, right? We need to be bringing these conversations to the broader public, not only to mothers, but the people who work with mothers, because you're doing the on-the-ground support of actually sitting with mothers, of going out and visiting their home if you're a doula or a social worker, supporting them through their birth if you're a midwife, an obstetrician, seeing them in your office, your clinic if you're a GP, right? Supporting the mother, right? If you're somebody who works with children, as a speech pathologist, as an OT, as a physio, as a chiropractor, as an acupuncturist. Right? These are all types of people who have come into the certification. Anybody who is working with children or with mothers, I feel, needs to be able to know and have insight into this information. So when I send out the replay of this, if you know people who will be interested in this conversation, please do forward this to them, because I hope that even with this training alone, we're able to spark some conversations into thinking about these things more deeply and thinking about the ways that actually we can be missing half the story if we don't know about the structure, if we don't know about the motherhood and the way that it's constructed. And if we're missing half the story, we're also missing the potential and possibility for creating change, long-lasting, significant, impactful, life-changing, transformative change. And so that's why I created this program. It's 10 weeks. I have done a lot of work in condensing some complex theory into lectures each week. I've broken them up because I know that most people who come into the certification are mothers themselves, so they are short lectures. Each week it's about an hour and a half worth of content each week. We have a 2-week break included in the 10 weeks. We have 6 months access to content, so you can go back and watch the lectures at your own pace if you need to, and revisit lectures as well. Each week we also have Zoom tutorials. These tutorials are amazing, because my way of teaching and my belief in terms of sharing this type of work is that we co-create knowledge, and that every single person who comes to the metaphorical table, it'd be great if we were all actually at a table together, wouldn't it? But every single person brings their own unique wisdom and experience and value, and that coming together and having conversations and doing this learning together actually opens a huge and an incredibly powerful portal for the generation of new insights and expertise and ways of thinking that have the potential to transform motherhood as a structure and individual mothers' lives, and of course their children's lives by virtue of that. And so it's a bringing together of people who are wanting to do this work, people who are willing to go there, who are willing to have these conversations, who are willing to do the introspective work to examine our own socialization within the system. And that is ongoing work. We do not get there. There's not a place that we reach for that, right? This is why the Zoom tutorials are so valuable, because it gives us this space and opportunity to have this dialogue together. There are also optional readings that you can dive into, and there are reflection questions each week as well, and we use them as the basis to explore and dive deeper into the content in our Zoom tutorials together. And so my aim with the certification is to not just knowledge dump onto you. Of course, knowledge acquisition has to be part of this, but it's to take you through a process. It's to create a container and an opportunity to facilitate your own process of transformation, of understanding, your own elevation of the support you're able to offer mothers, to bring in your own unique wisdom, expertise, and insight. And this does not have to mean that you already work with mothers. There are plenty of women who've joined the certification who do not yet work with mothers, but have a calling to. It's this sense of almost being pulled like a magnet, like magnetized to this work, and going, I want to be part of this. I want to make a difference. And I really acknowledge and recognize that that desire often comes from a personal place because of either the struggles or the things that we have overcome in our own mothering experiences, or what we've witnessed others experience, and that we want to create a change for future generations of mothers, and that we value the work of raising children. If we value the work of raising children, we need to value the inquiry into mothers' experiences and how to support mothers, to create space and opportunity not only for the development of children, which we are so focused on in our culture. If we really cared so much about that, then we would create space and opportunity for the development of mothers, for the valuing and the acknowledgement of the important work that people are doing who are in unpaid caring roles in our society. So we start the certification April 12th. At the end of it, you'll get a certificate of completion. You'll become part of a community of Motherhood Studies certified practitioners. And so my intention for this is each time I run the course to grow a global community of people who have these understandings, who are committed to this practice, and who are committed to changing the cultural conversation, narrative, and experience of what it means to be a mother in our society. That offers you a huge opportunity for collaboration, for greater learning, for coming together in order to create the type of change that we want to see for the world of our children and generations that come after us. The participants who have already enrolled, to give you an idea of some of their occupations and professions, we have, as I said, people who are not in this realm at all yet. They're teachers, or they're working in some area outside of motherhood support specifically. Psychologists. This is a really brilliant complementary training to those who are trained psychologically. We also have midwives, nurses, parent coaches, doulas, social workers, psychotherapists, postgraduate students as well, speech pathologists, writers, a whole bunch of people. And I just think that this variety is so invaluable, and people from across the world on all different continents and parts of the globe. And so how that works in terms of the content is a lot of it's in self-study mode, and then the Zoom calls will be scheduled at a bunch of different times and different days of the week to try and give you greatest opportunity to participate. And they're all recorded, of course, so you can watch the replay of them. So, if you are interested in joining, please either drop me a comment, send me a message, head to my website, drsophiebrock.com. You will see the tab on there for Motherhood Studies. It's / Motherhood Studies to find out more. I've got the curriculum up on the webpage, so you'll be able to go through each module and see some of the overview of the things we will be studying and learning. And if you are not in a position where you're able to join the certification for now, have a look at my podcast. Check out my podcast. Look at my Liberated Motherhood membership. It's a low-cost way for diving a little deeper into some of this work. I'll be running the certification again in September too, so keep your eye out for that. Jump on my mailing list if you're not on there already through my website. And thank you so much for being here with me. I think that anyone who has made it this far into this video, it shows me that you have a passion, that you have a calling, that you have a sense of awakening to what it means to be a mother and what the potential of motherhood could be for our society and culture if mothers were adequately supported, recognized, and if we were to see mothering as work, an important and valuable work that it is. Thank you for being here. As always, I'm open to chatting with any of you further. Just send me a message or an email at info@drsophiebrock.com. Bye.